Hello, my name is Christi Scarrow. Welcome to the Messy Leadership Podcast, where we talk about the hard stuff in managing people. Today, I'm really happy to welcome Shelly Anwyll. So, she's supporting the Canadian Professional Sales Association, which I've done some work with, and also proud to say she is the co-lead of the Toronto chapter of NextUp, which is an association that I am part of as well, and we work towards supporting women in their careers. So thank you so much, Shai, for being part of the conversation today.
Well, thanks so much for having me, Christy.
So, I know, you've been through ups and downs in your career like I have, and I'd love to hear about some of the, important lessons that you've learned that have shaped who you are as a leader today.
Sure. I think if I think about an important lesson, I would say the one that resonates most with myself is the art and science of listening. And to break that down like one tier lower, really the importance of active listening. And there are a series of different examples throughout my career where I didn't do it well, and then also where I've learned and evolved and recognized the importance. And really, I would say today I would list that as one of my core competencies, but not without time and experience and situations that help me to evolve and really develop better listening and specifically active listening skills.
So I'd love to hear how you define that because I think you're right. That's so foundational in being successful in so many things in our personal relationships. When you talk about active, what does that mean for you?
Yeah, I think like right off the top, I would say active listening is not going into situations or meetings or scenarios with a predefined decision or outcome, and having the openness and the opportunity to recognize, acknowledge, and really add other individuals' perspectives, points of views into whatever that situation scenario is. I think that would be like at the top of house in terms of what that means to me. And over the course of time, really understanding that these perspectives come from different mindsets, different cultures, different personal and professional experiences. Specifically at Sick Kids Foundation, like I would go on record saying one of the best jobs of my life. So I worked at the foundation, but on behalf of the Hospital for Sick Children. And my role at that time was the Vice President of Strategic and Corporate Partnership. And so what that allowed me to do with the hospital was sit with the leadership, the executive leadership team of the hospital. So if you can imagine and envision a room with like the brightest and best minds, like brain surgeons, like um, individual, like hospital administration with years of experience, and everybody coming to the table with a different framework, like as a stakeholder, a different perspective and point of view in order to solve for opportunities that I was bringing forward as potential partners and sponsors to the hospital, and working through some of the complexity of how that would work and how we would make these organizations fit into the hospital goals, but also their business and corporate social responsibility goals.
Wow, I can imagine that was an amazing learning experience as an environment where you said you're going to have super intelligent folks, you're going to have folks that play very different roles. And so I guess I don't know if this is a question so much as a reflection, but it's is how did you find sort of your ability to draw in the various perspectives and opinions and how in that process or in your work even now?
Yeah, so I think part of it is recognizing the importance or the priorities of the stakeholders around the room. which are and can be very different than the priorities of an organization that I'm trying to bring these two together, or just in any kind of business situation, like stakeholders and lines of business or other key influencing voices or areas that need to be represented. And so, that's typically the landscape that you're dealing with. And, so again, over the course of time, what I found in these situations is that you really need to foster and establish trust, right? Recognizing that we all need to trust each other, that we're all like, however we get there, we're gunning for the same goal, even though it may not be a straight line, that we have to show and have respect and regard for others and their opinions and their point of views, and not everybody is going to be served or have the outcome that they desire, but that it's facilitated in a manner of collaboration and that people really feel valued. So even if they're not getting what it is that they set out to achieve, that at least they were part of the journey and part of the decision-making process.
Yeah, so many great insights from what you said that I took, which is I like that idea of there's an organizational goal and there's this common goal that you can rally behind, but in the actual listening, it's how do you respect individual perspectives, and that individual is going to be coming from a different place, and so you're able to see it from different perspectives, knowing you're still going to a common place, and maybe not everybody is going to get to that place fully, but it's okay as long as they've been heard.
Right, right.
Super cool.
And they still might not feel okay, but at least you're doing your best in order to try to help the situation, and then formulate maybe some different alternatives that weren't even part of the consideration set at the onset of whatever it is that we were working on.
Interesting. Yeah, that sounds like amazing work. I think that would be really, really cool to be a part of that. So I'd love to shift a bit and just talk about now, sort of as you're later in your career and some of the areas that I like to call messy parts of leadership. What are some of the things that you still find challenging today? And what are some of the strategies that that help you to overcome it?
Yeah, so I think managing conflict feels like the common messy in any work or even personal environment today is just again, how are we managing conflict and how are we working through it in a productive manner?
And so I'd love to hear a bit more about some of the things that work, because I'm passionate about conflict as well, and think you kind of need it, although it's painful. And so how have you found ways to make it more productive?
Yeah, so I'm wired in proactive communication. I think my husband and I get along so well because he is not wired that way. So I'm like pulling stuff out of him. But for me, if I sense it, see it, like whether that's visual, body language, like angry fingers, like however it represents itself, I'm typically very proactive in communication, and I'm very astute when it comes to things that can and should be facilitated through an email exchange, and things that I just need to pick up the phone and have a one-to-one conversation because they're either sensitive or urgent or could be misconstrued or misunderstood through wrong interpretation of words. And so I think proactive communication would be like at the high of my list in terms of what I've learned and how I deal with those messy conflicts.
Yeah, and I think if you said you're in tune to it, that helps because you're aware, you're looking for it, and as soon as you sort of see someone may not be in a good space, you're able to reach out. And I find the challenge, because I lean to more willingness to sort of speak my mind, and probably it's why I get along with with my husband, who is the opposite. He's the little bit of the safe, I'm a little bit of the brave, and we can push each other a bit on that space. But so I guess just knowing some people are so uncomfortable with being in conflict at all and having those difficult conversations. What success have you found in navigating that?
Yeah, I think again through a variety of different situations, probably COVID being the most compelling, empathetic, right? Like listening with a desire to learn and understand and being empathetic as opposed to critical or subjective is probably the biggest lesson learned in order to help break through and break down to navigate into those conflict or high tension type of conversations.
Yeah, and you're right. Empathy is so key, and it's something that I think the nice thing is that the later generations have a better grasp or thought process around mental health that I know personally wasn't as present when I was sort of a younger leader. So I think there's some understanding of how empathy is now such a core skill where it may not have been such a push and a drive in the past.
Yeah, I completely agree. And, the recognition and then the training and the development and the resources in order to support individuals to be more effective as leaders or managers and considering the importance of empathy. I think all of that has really evolved in a pretty significant way.
And then maybe this is a hard question to ask, but is there ways that we can teach empathy? Like how do we build, especially like you talked about, trust being so essential and now we're more on screens and we're hiding a little bit behind texting or DMing or social media and such that, I think it's harder for a younger generation to have that face-to-face time. So how any thoughts on how we keep people, very much becoming empathetic and having those moments to build trust?
Yeah, I've always had a management style of direct feedback, whether it's working specifically with a team of direct reports or indirectly across an organization where I've got, in my opinion, I've got leadership, accountability, and responsibility, regardless if it's a direct line report. And so I'll often want to acknowledge and highlight when I see great performance or observe behaviors that you want individuals across a team or organization to replicate. But in that same manner, also provide, one-on-one feedback or coaching in order to suggest some alternatives or considerations. And so empathy for me would fall into that, where there's a learning or teachable opportunity to provide some feedback and coaching and some ideas or suggestions on what could be considered for managing or handling a situation like that in the future.
Yeah, and it's again being able to, I think, be transparent, have those conversations directly because that in itself role models empathy for the situation that they're in. So
Right.
yeah, like that thought. So I'll shift to another this my last question, or probably maybe not my last question, but another question, which is, the listeners are those that are maybe struggling to be leaders, struggling to manage people, struggling to influence. And I think, frankly, it's challenging for all of us at some point. But what advice would you have for folks that are struggling now,
Um, who are struggling now with managing.
managing people?
Advice that I would have for managing people now is really, I guess it would be to take a step back and evaluate your team and, prioritize what it is that you want to do or what you think is right and best. And so again, for me, I think trust is at the high end of all of that, that if I'm struggling, then I want to build comfort and a trusting relationship, even if somebody doesn't agree with me or align with decisions that I'm making or strategies that I'm deploying, but having a trusting relationship so you can have like difficult conversations or I agree to disagree or those types of things. I think for me that's the most critical. And then again, for a manager, it's understanding or having a mentor or someone that they respect or regard and emulating behaviors or behavioral traits or competencies that they could transfer and transition into their team and their area of work or responsibility, I think is another area up and coming managers, and then empowering people. So, you know, knowing when to like close your mouth, sit on your fingers, and allow people to make decisions, make mistakes, do things in a way that they can learn and develop and evolve versus always being told or directed, or have them always ask you what to do versus allow them to formulate, and really start building confidence and competencies to help them evolve and develop as a manager.
Well, I know one of my struggles when I was a new manager was a bit of that. It's a combination of what you said. It was like how do I let go of feeling like I know the way to do it and I need to trust the people that work with me to do it and to do it in the way that in my mind it like had to be this sort of way. And it took a lot of work to go, how do I let go of the fact that it has to be this certain way? Or and you said those that struggle, I think, which a lot of probably new managers have, is that I don't necessarily trust my team to do it the right way. So any thoughts on if that's sort of going through your head as a manager right now, how to get
Yeah,
past that?
yeah, I always consider like what's the worst thing, right? Like honest, like what's the worst thing that could occur if something was done wrong, right? Like we're there to support each other. So, if something didn't go exactly as we had wanted or anticipated, then you've got support people around you to get involved in a conversation to help them navigate their way around it. But yeah, I always kind of consider like what's the worst thing that could happen. And in the work that I've always done, the implication of it, it can be figured out.
Yeah. And
And
you
the
did some pretty
learning,
yeah, go ahead.
yeah, and the learning that is obtained from the individual who goes through that experience is far more significant and lasting than whatever negative implication or outcome occurs from something that they never really intended to do. It just, you know, they did.
That's good advice because if you're in that situation where you're going, well, I don't know if they can do it or if it's going to be right and it's going to be like this. If you just step back and say, well, if they don't do it quite right or they do it different, what's the worst that can happen? What does it really mean in the whole big scheme of things? I think that is an important dialogue people should probably reflect on when they're in that moment of struggle and feeling like I can't let go because I need to hold this too carefully. So,
Yeah,
yeah.
and I've done some sales coaching recently as part of the transition of that I'm in my career. And what I observe is that typically people hang on to doing stuff or telling people exactly how to do things in a way that prevents that individual from doing the job and the tasks that they should be doing, right? So it's like you're never going to grow your sales if you're always so worried about what your account team is emailing to your existing customers. So if they're managing the existing customers and you're accountable for growth, how are you growing if you're continuously oversighting? So you're just choosing the behavior that you are doing versus maybe the scarier skill that you need to be doing. And so that's what I observe now is that's where a strong tendency occurs. And it is typically when someone is moving from individual contribution into management or leadership. And it's crossing that line of now I have to lead versus do. And so, there's a transition there and helping individuals to grow and evolve in their skill sets.
And you're right. It's more sometimes it's just more comfortable. I'm just going to keep doing what I
Right,
do. And when you challenge them and say, what else could you be doing if you weren't doing the work of the people who are working for you, then that can be potentially a powerful motivator as well, especially if they've got somebody coaching them with those kind of questions. Like, are you getting,
right,
getting to the right things? Are you prioritizing the right things? Or are you focusing on just over managing your team? So
right.
that's really great thoughts. Well, any last things you think are important to share, Shelly, before we wrap up?
No, I like to, I really enjoyed our conversation. I like the messy bits because those are always the uncomfortable ones to talk about, but the ones that rear their head quite often. And I think, like be patient, right? Like let things evolve and just go through, enjoy the learning and the exploration of developing and broadening your skill set and competencies, and like don't try to sprint or rush to the finish line, because the experience is so much of the journey that really lands people in successful careers and just more effective managers and leaders.
Yeah, I think that's a great spot to leave us at, because that's part of my intention, is to people to recognize it's not easy. And no matter what level you are in an organization, there's going to be bumps along the way, but your thought of just, enjoy the journey and don't feel like you have to push yourself too hard to get there, because it is a learning opportunity. So thank you so much, Shelley, for sharing some of these valuable insights. To my listeners, if you're looking for ways to navigate the messy bits of leadership, you can find some resources in the show notes, some of the details of our actions coming out of today, and you can find me at christiscarrow.com. Thank you very much, Shelley.
Yeah, thank you.